Saying that communication is important is almost the definition of a cliche, but it's also 100% true. Now, we're always communicating something in some form, whether we know it or not. And the way we communicate is incredibly unique and dynamic, and it also leaves plenty of room for interpretation by the person or people on the receiving end. So, how well do you know how you communicate, and how well do you know the way that those on your team communicate? We believe that everyone has established patterns and preferences when it comes to communication. We've talked about this before, and I've included links in the show notes if you want to go back and revisit those resources. But when working with teams around this topic, one of the first things that we do here at Leadership Vision is to help people understand those patterns and preferences so that they can use those to effectively communicate with others. And as we've also said before, if you can better understand how you're communicating, you'll be more effective at engaging others. Hello and welcome to the Leadership Vision podcast. My name is Nathan Freeberg, and today on the podcast, I get to communicate with my colleague, Amy Rollinger. Now, you may remember Amy is the newest member of our team, and because of the pandemic, we haven't really had much of an opportunity to get to know one another and learn each other's patterns and preferences for communication. So today, I thought that we would take a step back from our team engagement series and use some of the tools that we've been sharing with you to better understand each other's patterns and preferences around communication. Amy and I will be asking and answering some questions of each other related to the way that we prefer to communicate, not only to better understand one another, live time here in front of you, kind of, but also we hope to give you some examples for how you might do this with a person on your team, or maybe it's your entire team, or maybe in your entire organization, or even in your family or other personal relationships. So keep listening. You are listening to the Leadership Vision podcast, sharing our expertise in the discovery, practice, and implementation of a strengths-based approach to people, teams, and culture. For more resources about developing your strengths, the strengths of your team, or the strengths of your entire organization, click the link in the show notes or visit us on the web at leadershipvisionconsulting.com. Amy, hello.
Hello, Nathan.
How are you today?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for doing this. As I said in the introduction, I'm excited to, one, get to know you a little bit better, but also hopefully give our listeners like a real world, like a live time example of how you can use some fairly basic questions that are part of our team engagement process to get to know people better. Mm-hmm. You and I had our first interview a few months ago now. Mm-hmm. That was just fascinating as I got to know you even more. Listeners, if you haven't listened to that one, or if you don't know who Amy is, Amy, who are you? I'm just going to have you introduce yourself briefly.
Sure. I'm Amy Rollinger. I work with Leadership Vision as the executive assistant, and I work from home in Harrisburg, South Dakota.
And you started in November of 2020.
I did.
And so as of this recording, that's about 7, 8 months, somewhere in there. And so Amy and I still have not met in person because of the pandemic. And so if you've been following along with our podcast, you know that we've been doing this whole series on our team engagement process. We have these 6 C's: communication, conflict, collaboration, change, compassion, and courage. And this is, I think we're about 2/3 of the way through it. And I just thought it would be a cool chance to sort of experiment, if you will, on how you can use some of these basic questions. And we're just going to focus on 1C today and get to know your teammates a little bit better. And ultimately the goal here, especially around this one about communication, is to figure out how do we have better, more effective communication. And so Amy and I have, pretty much only communicated via Slack and email and a couple of these video chats. So it should be good. It should be really good. So we're kind of going to focus on 4 questions today, and this will all be in the show notes. And so the first one is just identifying, so I'm going to read them all, and then Amy and I will just kind of go back and forth. Name the audiences where you communicate on a regular basis. Amy and I have both identified 4 that we have actually very much in common. And then what are your communication preferences? What styles are you strongest at? And how is your communication style bringing life to others? And we'll see if we get into ways it's not bringing life to others, but we want to keep it positive.
That's right.
So Amy and I both identified the 4 audiences where we communicate as our families. I think we're both sort of, how should we say, household managers. We kind of run things as our spouses both have big, fancy other jobs.
Yeah.
We're both involved in schools. We both have a side hustle, which I just learned. And then obviously the professional context of leadership vision. Amy, talk a little bit about maybe one or two of those. Just where do you see your communication popping up the most? Maybe where does it really differ, perhaps from professional to your family? I know I try really hard not to yell at anyone at Leadership Vision when they're not sitting down and eating their dinners, but let's just kind of
clean up your dishes.
Yeah, exactly. Kind of riff a little bit on kind of these audiences, because I think so for listeners, I'm going to do this a lot, kind of zoom in, zoom out. For listeners, I think it's important for you to understand like where your audience is, where your spaces or stages where you communicate, and then really kind of dial in, like, what does that look like in these different arenas? So Amy, tell me a little bit about some of these spots.
Sure. I think family, that one popped up immediately. As you mentioned, we're both kind of the ops, the center. Right, right. My husband's a principal, and so that means he works a lot of hours. And even when he's home, sometimes there are phone calls or emails or whatever, even during the summer. And then we have 3 teenage kids. So we're running, life doesn't really slow down. The busy is different than it was 10 years ago. Right. So we have an 18-year-old who just graduated high school and is heading to college here. We're going to register him. Wow. I will be doing that because Ryan is going on a conference right now. Yeah. So I'll be going with him to register for college. And then we have a 16-year-old, and then we have a 13-year-old little girl. So 2 boys and a girl, and just coordinating the summer, for instance, they're in lifting schedules, and one is in baseball, and another one has a couple camps, and another one has just various cool things that 16-year-olds do. When you can't drive yet, you have to have a little more coordination. So
this is the first summer where we've really had to actually do that, because my kids are a lot younger than yours, 3, 5-year-old twins, and then an 8-year-old. And so we're just getting into that, camps and baseball. My son just started doing that. And things like that. Do you ever find yourself over communicating to the point where people stop listening?
Oh yeah.
Because I've found with like coordinating things like that, it's like, here's a color coordinated Google Calendar. It's all right here, but it's almost like overwhelming. And so folks just tune it out. Is that something you've experienced?
I think in part that, and then I think also, unfortunately, they know that, and this, I think, can kind of be related back to business as well, or work as well, but they know I'm going to handle it.
Yeah.
And so they only have to pay so much attention. Because totally. I'll probably swoop in. And so I've had to learn and kind of draw some boundaries there, which is probably a whole new other topic where Melissa would have to help us out. But just drawing okay, I'm going to rescue you this time, but you know what? You knew about this and you didn't say anything, and now your jersey isn't clean or whatever. So again, 10 years past where you are,
right? Yeah,
trying to help them be responsible and let them make mistakes that help them learn. But it's hard to do that sometimes.
Yeah, but okay, so now this is really interesting, Amy, because if I'm being my house is like that too. I'm like the stopgap. My kids are a lot younger, so there's a certain level of like, your dress for ballet isn't clean. Why didn't you tell me? It's like, well, you're 3. Maybe you shouldn't. But if I'm being honest, and now we're dipping into the professional side of it, like I kind of do that with you sometimes, with like filling out payroll. I'm like, Amy, I should honestly put a thing in my calendar, but I know Amy's gonna like send me a couple of email reminders, and so I'll just use that as like the stopgap. So it's interesting how, like on the family level, like I'm really annoyed because other people don't, take accountability for things I know I've communicated. On the professional level, maybe I'm a little, lazier about things like that. But, we often play different roles, I think, and, our communication styles and really patterns and preferences is kind of what we're talking about. They are consistent, but maybe there's they're not in every one of these arenas.
So. I would agree. And I think the challenge, if you're looking at professionally, is just like we talked about, being able to say, okay, this is this is yours. We communicated about this. I need you to handle it. And there's some importance in that. And there's some ownership in that. So yes, that translates between work and family. At least in my mind, I think, you're generally working with adults. So they may have had somebody who kind of helped them out a lot, and maybe they need to take more ownership, because then they will take more ownership. If that makes sense.
It totally makes sense.
Yeah.
Sometimes I wonder, so I'm curious what your side hustle is. Mine, I have a 5K fun run company, and well, the last year has been all crazy, but we were doing like 25 events throughout the year. And what I found is that my level of communication, of ownership of communication, is totally different in that arena, because, it's really just me and my business partner. Like there's nobody I report to. And so there's a lot more ownership, a lot more responsibility. It's all up to me, whether it sinks or swims, so to speak. And so I find my communication in that arena is a bit more intense. It can be a bit more, I can feel like there's like more writing on it. Like, how could you send that email out? There's a typo in it. Why didn't you do this? Da, 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 da. That's different than, on a professional level with Leadership Vision. Obviously I'm doing the same thing, but there's like, it maybe goes through more filters, or, if certain things don't happen, I know that there's other stop gaps. Briefly, what is your side hustle, if you want to share that? And
sure.
And do you feel any sense of, I guess weight of ownership around, messages being communicated in that area versus the others?
For sure. And that makes perfect sense. I think my side hustle is that I am an independent consultant with Tastefully Simple. So we sell food.
Cool.
And seasonings and sauces and stuff. And so I love it. I've been doing that for 17 years.
Wow.
Yeah. So it's definitely different, because it's similar in that I'm communicating via social media, email primarily. And it is different because, as you said, it's me. And if I don't get it done, it's not going to get done. So if I don't get the sales, I don't get the paycheck.
Right.
Just like if you don't set up the races, you don't have a business, an active business, right? So if we're not working, so it's flexible, but not optional. So that's different. But I would agree that, especially, now that the kids are older, I'm doing less. It's way more side than it used to be.
Sure.
But 10 years ago, even, it was, and it doesn't probably make a lot of sense, but my kids obviously were your kids' as ages.
Yeah.
And I was doing a lot. We were going on trips. And I think then the motivation was it allowed Ryan and I to get away. And which kind of leads me into my second side of not just ops, but maintaining a marriage in the midst of the communication and the crazy, right?
A whole separate podcast on marriage communication is like,
right?
Don't get me started.
Maybe a series. It might be more than just one, Nathan.
Maybe a spinoff. Yeah.
Yes. But that's what that allowed for us at that point in our lives was, we had littles everywhere all the time. And Ryan at that point was coaching and was a teacher. And I was home and doing daycare. And so we had zero money. We weren't taking any cool trips. But when I earned these trips through my side hustle, he and I had time away together as a couple. Yeah. And so that helped us maintain our marriage in a really crazy, busy, a time that you're very aware of because you're living in it, right?
I hear you.
Yeah. So that's one of the things that it provided was time for us, which meant communication. I remember one of the first trips being like, oh my gosh, I forgot how much I liked you or how funny, I remember laughing and just being like, I forgot how funny you are.
Yeah.
We haven't completed a full conversation in so long because there was always somebody who needed something right in the middle. And so I appreciated that about that opportunity when it provided that for us. Yeah. So our communication, that's kind of how we caught up then. Yeah. And now it's more of like kids rides, riding to kids events, and maybe even sitting at the baseball games. Oh, hey, next week we need to maybe figure out, just because even though they're not around us all that often as teenagers, it's still busy or we're just sitting and not thinking for 5 to 10 minutes.
Well, what's so interesting about kind of starting with, the question about context or, the audiences you communicate with, is it helps see how your, messaging or styles or preferences of communication needs to be very different for these different audiences, but also very, very similar in, there's common threads through all of these. There's definitely the thread of, responsibility, making sure, that your side hustle, that you earn money, making sure that, like with clients and leadership vision, that happens, making sure that your family knows where to be, making sure that you and your husband are still married. Like there's this thread of kind of, I don't know, feeling ownership or weight on the outcome of that. And so I'd imagine, and this will maybe go into our second question of kind of your communication preferences, in terms of like how you do that. You can adapt and you can change and you can, hopefully grow, and shift in and out just depending on which audience that you're communicating with. Before we were recording, I was telling you, my preferences, I think, are always to be in person. But then the more I was thinking about it, was like, but I'm such a verbal processor. I'm someone who, even right now, is kind of like, thinking of stuff as it's coming out of my mouth to share. I actually probably prefer writing it and taking my time and, sitting with it and using, a grammar checker and a spell checker and all of that stuff to really process my thoughts. But a lot of these audiences that I'm a part of, I don't get to do that. So then it becomes more about, processing out loud. And so something that you should know about me, and listeners, this is ultimately kind of why we're doing this activity. So Amy, something you should know about me is that when we're, when I'm talking, when I'm communicating, a lot of it is, maybe tapping into my ideation strength, but it's trying to like, figure it out as we go. I read this quote the other day about how it's really hard to, have you ever driven in fog, Amy, like really thick fog? You can only see like as far as your headlights go. And it's
Right.
a little scary. It's a little challenging, but you can make it your whole trip that way. And sometimes that's how I feel. And I don't know if you're someone that likes to have I want to see all the way to my destination before I start, or if you're okay with that ambiguity of like, well, we'll just go as far as the headlights go, and then as far as they go, and as they go. But something to know about me is I'm okay with that. And so even in like communication, as we're trying to work something out or figure it out, it's like, let's just kind of talk and figure it out together and be a little messy since we're in it right now, which does not translate super great to social media or to, written form if that more contemplative process hasn't happened first. Does that make sense? Do you relate to that? Are you similar,
I do.
different?
And one of the things that came to mind as you were talking about that is, I can, and I think many of us would relate to the fact that when we trust the individual that we're in communication with, we are more able to work through it because we trust that we're together in this. We're taking care of each other. We're looking out for each other. We have each other's best interests in mind. There we go. That's the words that we wanted.
That's the word.
And so, I'm also verbally working through it because like you, I prefer to write it out and really think about it. And, to this point, and maybe you'll delete this, but Ryan and I have had arguments over text.
Oh my goodness.
He's in our room.
Because my wife and I has never, ever done that. And we've never done it from the same house. So I have no idea what you're talking about. Please explain. This is foreign
I've
to
been
me,
in the
Amy.
kitchen. I've been in the kitchen and he's been in our room and we are discussing here's what I thought about that. And here's what I thought about that. And it's, I think truly because then I can think about it.
Right.
Delete that word instead of, it's the funny meme that you've seen where they type out the text they really want to type out and then they delete it and then they type the text that should be sent.
Exactly.
It's that whole like think it through. But when and personally, I don't really fly by the seat of my pants as well. I prefer planned things out. But I know specifically from leadership vision experience, I can do that. I can work through it, figure it out, walk through it and talk through it because I know that we're all in it together. Those of us who are working in it, whatever the thing is, we're working through it and communicating and there's trust. And so that
Absolutely.
feels okay to figure it out as we go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. This is interesting. The trust in communication is so vital and so important, and it's so obvious. But when you were just sharing that, I was thinking, I trust Amy as a professional, but I don't know her well enough yet to trust her as on that personal level.
Right.
And, Brian and Linda, Linda, I've got 20 plus years of connection with. And I think Brian, it's like 15 or 16, all kinds of ups and downs, ins and outs. And I think that's something that can only be built with time. So I'm excited, Amy, to to develop that. But as a professional, and I don't even as I say that, I don't know exactly how I would differentiate the personal trust versus the professional trust. But Melissa, I haven't known that much longer than you. But I'm I'm closer there. But what does that even mean or look like? I mean, I think as we're learning how to communicate and trust with each other, a simple example is what's okay to joke about?
Yes.
What what is funny to joke about? Is it and I'm not talking about things that everybody would say is inappropriate.
Right.
But will she think that a joke about, this is funny, and I know Brian and Linda will laugh at that. So I'm going to go to that material.
Right.
But does that make sense?
It does. And I think you're exactly right. I think it's just time and getting to know each other as individuals. Exactly. And that is
not only through a camera. Correct.
Right.
Yeah, totally. That's so interesting. So the third question here is, what styles are you strongest at? We referred to it a little bit in kind of our preferences around, the in-person communication. But where do you feel like you're really knocking out of the park style-wise in communication?
Sure. I think I do best at writing. And then I think I do well as I'm getting to know and understand people. I think I do a decent job of hearing who they are and then relating to them on a personal level.
Sure.
Regardless of, just finding that commonality and how that can make people feel closer. And I think I learned that through my side hustle, probably more than anything, because you're, at one point in time, I was going into someone's home and I knew them, but I didn't necessarily know all their friends.
Sure.
And so I'm listening to kind of the things that they do or the craziness of their house. And my kids have been in sports, so I can relate to that. And my husband is super busy and gone a lot. And so I can relate to that. Or I have my own goals and I wasn't always just a mom. So I could relate on that level. And even just that, gosh, I'm trying to do all the things, but I can't do all the, so just finding ways to relate to individuals in person. I felt like that was something that I did well and helped me to be successful in that realm. So, but if I'm simply just communicating, I will probably, if I have the opportunity, I will write it out first.
Yes.
And even if we're going to talk about it, I write it out and think about it, or I'll have some bullet points, especially if it's something that's important to me. And I know it's important to our relationship, whether that's a working relationship or a personal relationship, but I want to get it right. And I fear that I will get emotional if I don't have those bullet points. Sure. And I may get emotional anyway. I kind of do that. Not like yelling so much as just a lot of I cry. I'm a crier. And so, and that's not all bad, Nathan. No. I think it's a good thing overall. Linda shared something about that with me that kind of released my frustration in it, but just that. So then those bullet points help me stay focused. Even if I get a little emotional, I can more easily bring myself back. So,
sure.
How about you? What are your thoughts on it?
Yeah, well, so I'm hands down better verbal communicator. My dad was a pastor growing up, and so I was in front of, the church congregation reading scripture verses at a very young age in all kinds of plays and theater and drama and speech. And I've had a bunch of jobs where I'm just in front of a lot of people. my job before Leadership Vision was I was literally multiple times a year in front of hundreds of people, often, a couple thousand people a few times. So I am really good like in front of people. I think that's what my favorite part of Leadership Vision is: consulting, doing some of our large group stuff. I love working a crowd. And our fourth question is, how is your communication style bringing life to others? For sure, humor, making people feel at ease, connecting to like a common mission or goal, or setting up what this time is about. Just that warmth. I think I'm really good at that.
I would agree.
Thank you. What I've learned, however, and this is true of the podcast, this is true of any time I'm in front of people, is that I'm not good at winging it. I might be good for off the top of my head, like joke every now and then, and maybe a few observational things. But if I have something that I really want to say, if I just get up there, even with like sometimes a couple words will do, but I really need to think it out. I really need to sit down. If there's like important things I want to communicate. And so what I learned over the course of 10 years when I was giving these large talks to, thousands of people, was I have to script out this entire thing, like word for word. I would go over it tons of times with other people. They listen. And then I would more or less memorize it. I wouldn't memorize, it wasn't like a play where it was every word, but it was like the big ideas, because I think I come across better in front than I would do on writing. Like the feeling doesn't come across in writing. And again, I'm kind of combining our two last questions here, but like, I think that's something I'm good at. And so, why this matters is it's important to know then sometimes when we're together, it's almost like I'm trying to do something like that. If it's just like in a one-on-one or like a small, like our team. And so, people often, talk about my jokes or other stuff. It's sometimes I can just like pick up on like, hey, we need to relax. We need to loosen up. But again, if I'm not really prepared, that's where that can cause, I don't want to say cause problems, but at our 10-year college reunion, I was like on the committee and I got up to give like a welcome and I hadn't prepared at all. And I sat down, my wife was like, I was like, what? She's like, not your best work. I was like, I know. Anyway, where do you feel your style, it feels like we're maybe similar this way. Like I'm sensing we perhaps have a similar sense of humor. Where do you feel your style is like bringing life to others? Is it also through a humorous anecdote or quip?
Yeah, I think so. And I think that's kind of how I get to know people and how I, like you said, just like, do we need to lighten things up a little? Or we'd laugh a lot in our house and in our family. And I love that. Ryan, my husband, is really funny. I look forward to you guys meeting him. And
oh yeah, I love funny people.
Yes, they're the best.
Yeah.
And so, and with Brian and Linda, I love that about them is that I don't know that my jokes are that great or that I'm funny, but they are so good about laughing so easily. So they're really good audience.
They're not an easy audience though. So
aren't
I would
they?
say if
Well,
you
then
can get them
I'm
to
doing all right.
like if you can make Linda laugh where it sounds like she's having an asthma attack,
Yes.
that's a good day. Which
a little
maybe
scary,
that's
but a good day.
Yeah, it's like, oh shoot, do you have your inhaler? What's happening?
Yes. Oh, funny. Yes. So I enjoy that very much. And I know, and it's something that we go back and forth and joke back and forth a lot during our workday, which makes it a lot more pleasant to be on a screen, rather than, if we were in an office and I was popping into their office and telling them some story about what my 16-year-old did recently and there, because it's always interesting and fun, but, we aren't able to do that. So we use, and we kind of talked about it when you and I spoke last, but I feel like we do a good job of being in touch, even though we're not in an office together. Right. And so being able to see each other and talk often, which means laughing and sharing. And so, yes, I think my humor definitely comes into play. And then just understanding and empathy and reading reading cues on people, just you can see how they're feeling about, or,
right.
Yeah, there's a ton of those. And again, new podcasts, verbal visual cues, but just really being intuitive about what what am I seeing on Brian's face?
Mm-hmm.
How did Linda just change the way she was sitting? Things like that. So I can say, okay, so maybe we're in the weeds here and maybe we can come back. And so just using that in our communication and in understanding, here's what I'm seeing from you. And because of that, maybe we need to move this to a new podcast, a new session, a new time. Maybe we need to pull this out. And again, that's work is being able to see people and know what they need a little bit or recognize that something needs to be different. Maybe you don't know what that is, but just seeing them and going, okay, they changed while we were talking about this thing. So what do I need to do to adapt to that? Yeah. Maybe it's not saying it in front of everybody, but maybe it's communicating on a one-on-one basis later because you saw that. So I think that can be really, really important, and not can be, is really important.
Super important. Well, I think
as we're in work settings.
Yeah. I think that something I've noticed about you in 8 months or whatever it's been is it seems like, again, along those lines, like you do a good job summarizing or, saying things like, so what I hear you saying is this. And to me, that as always like demonstrates someone who's actually listening, not just waiting to talk, and someone who is really, it's important that they get it right, that they understand the message being communicated so that, often that they can then go and re-communicate or help someone else understand what needs to be communicated. And so I appreciate that, Amy. Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Nathan. I
think a final thing I want to do for us here, and maybe this is just a summation of the last 31 minutes here. Let's say that we're hiring a new employee and you want to tell them, a sentence or a phrase about yourself. I, Amy, when it comes to communication, I, Amy, do this. Or maybe if I had more time to think through how I want to ask that, it would sound a little better. But does that make sense? It's like, what's like an important note or nugget about you?
It's important to know that as a communicator, it's important to know that I think that is a good question. I think it's important that you know that I care about you and I want to serve you in a way that helps us both grow.
Wow. That's not at all the way I would have answered that or how I'm going to answer that question. I just realized you're such a better person than I am. You immediately went with like the other person. And so like that idea of understanding and empathy is so real with you. And I really like that. We're building trust as we speak.
Yay.
That's great. Because I was going to say it's important. Like, how did you phrase it? When it comes to communication, you need to know about me.
As a communicator, it's important. It's important to know that I.
Okay, so as a communicator, it's important for you to know that I'm always adapting. I'm always iterating. That I'm always kind of, I don't want to say making it up, but like I communicate a lot, hoping that there's something there that will be helpful or useful. If it's a really, really important high level. Like professional in front of people thing, I need to prepare. I'm halfway decent on my feet, but I really prefer to prepare and go at it that way, which so that other people are successful as well. There we go. I added that. Yeah. That's good. Well, Amy, this has been actually a lot of fun.
It has.
We have 6 of these C's, so maybe we can continue this process after, some of the other ones. And listeners, again, I would just encourage you, like some of these, you saw how this conversation was, about a half an hour. It could have been shorter if you wanted to, but it's a way that you can get to know your team. I think especially for managers and team leaders and anyone else in positions of leadership over others, just to sit down with, coffee or a bagel or whatever you eat or drink in your, make it very comfortable in a setting where you can just say, hey, how do you, where are you communicating? How do you like to do that? Because then ultimately I think then let's say, Amy, somewhere down the road, like you and I butt heads about something, or there's some sort of communication, mishap or miscommunication, we perhaps can come back to some of these things and say, oh, well, I was, maybe forcing Amy into my style of things, or gosh, I was not thinking that through, or
I didn't give Nathan enough time to organize his thoughts. And so it didn't go as well as it could have
Or
if
that,
I was,
right.
giving them a heads up. Yeah.
Or it's like over communicate or like whatever it is.
Sure.
Like I feel like it disarms things so we can come back and even, jokingly, you could say like, Amy, is this a text message from the same house type of a situation we're getting into here? What's going on? Because see, it's like, okay, this is funny. Yes, maybe there's some tension, whatever. But anyway, I feel like being open about, because communication, as we said, is like the bedrock of everything. Like we could probably have a very similar conversation around collaboration, change, conflict, and all of the C's that we have here. But starting with communication, I think, is important. So, any final thoughts? I think we've said a lot, but any final notes of communication?
I don't think so. I think like we said, that trust is that big factor and building trust takes time. And the more time you spend, the more you invest in people, the better your outcomes are going to be, regardless of what the situation is, whether it's a fun, humorous one or whether it's texting from the kitchen. So it's got to go better in the end. Put in the time and build the trust.
That's right. Well, Amy, thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Nathan.
And thank you, listeners, for listening to the Leadership Vision podcast, sharing our expertise in the discovery, practice, and implementation of a strengths-based approach to people, teams, and culture. For more resources about developing your strengths, the strengths of your team, or the strengths of your entire organization, click the link in the show notes or visit us on the web at leadershipvisionconsulting.com. And if you would like help learning how to communicate better on your team or any of our other elements of our team engagement process or strengths, please email us. Send an email to connect@leadershipvisionconsulting.com. We would love to see if there's a way to help you, or we'd even just love to bounce some ideas off of each other. Maybe we can both grow in that way. I'm Nathan Freeberg.
I'm Amy Rollinger.
And on behalf of our entire team, thanks for listening.